another very important location for cartilage. I can't emphasize how important this is. The ends of all the bones, the long bones of the body, have a thin coat of cartilage on it, maybe about the thickness of a dime here, a millimeter or so. And it's cartilage against cartilage in the joint. That makes it very smooth. If you had bone against bone, you'd just scrape and squawk when you walked. It would be a terrible sound. And not only that, it'd be the worst case of arthritis. Eventually the bones would just fuse. So we need to have a little coating of cartilage at the joints. We call that articular cartilage. The cartilages that made up our ribs and all the other bones of the body, except for, well, the vault of the skull and the mandible, start out straight away as bone in the developing baby. But all the other bones are going to start as cartilage. Let's look at cartilage first, and then we'll discuss why it's a good idea to have bones start out as cartilage. First, the cell types in cartilage. There are chondroblasts. Remember, this word blast means a maker or former. So chondro means cartilage. Chondroblast means a cell that makes cartilage. So we have chondroblasts. They secrete a connective tissue. We talked about collagen, a very tough fibrous material. They secrete a special type of collagen that is found in cartilage. We call it type 2 collagen as opposed to type 1 that we have in our dermis of our skin. Chondrocyte, I mentioned that a cell that's called a cyte is a cell that usually is no longer active. It has become whatever function it was doing or dividing, it has ceased to do that. The chondrocyte is a mature chondroblast, and over time they can become quite large. We call that hypertrophic when something gets bigger. If it gets bigger because it has more cells, it's hyperplastic. But if something gets bigger because the cell itself is getting bigger, that's hypertrophic. And it's the fate of most chondrocytes in our body after they become hypertrophic, to just die and break down. And you may wonder, well, why would you want to do that? Well, it's the fate of most cartilage in our body to break down. If that weren't the case, our bodies would be very rubbery. I mean, all our bones would be cartilage. You could bend your arms and all sorts of things, just like your nose and your ear. Wouldn't that be terrible? So we'll see that chondrocytes mature, break down, and then the cartilage itself fills up with mineral and eventually dissolves. Remember, we had osteoblasts and we had osteoclasts. Osteoblasts made bone, osteoclasts broke it down. Clastic means to eat something or to break it down. Historically, there were people called iconoclasts who, after the Reformation, thought that they had to go around breaking all of the statues and the paintings and the stained glass windows. They thought that was not something God wanted. And so these fine people went around destroying all the great art treasures of Europe. They were called iconoclasts. So here's a chondroclast. It breaks bone down. Or cartilage, I should say. Well, cartilage has a matrix to it. That's the extracellular component. Being a connective tissue, it's going to have more extracellular material than it will have cellular material. That's true of most connective tissues, whereas an epithelium is all cells. The connective tissue is collagen. The dry weight, about 40 to 70% of a piece of cartilage, is this fibrous protein collagen that is the basic fiber of connective tissue, very strong, very tough. Some cartilage can have elastic fibers in it. We mentioned that. Adds a certain amount of stretchiness and the ability to restore to an original shape. There are chemicals called proteoglycans in cartilage, primarily chondroitin sulfate, and these bind a great deal of water. They have a sort of a domain. They're shaped like a bottle brush almost, and they can bind water. So one of the reasons cartilage is so flexible and stretchy is there's a lot of water bound inside that cartilage. In fact, cartilage is 70% water by fresh weight. And finally, it is the fate of most, but not all, cartilages in the body to calcify. That is, to take on calcium the way maybe a bone would. Only calcified cartilage is not at all like bone. It's very fragile, and it dissolves very quickly in the body. So all of the bones that you see there used to be cartilage at some point in the embryo, and fetus. But the cartilage was turned into calcified cartilage. The calcified cartilage then kind of dissolved and broke down. Chondroclast perhaps helping out in this. And built on top of that calcified cartilage is true bone. So cartilage doesn't turn into bone. Cartilage is replaced by bone in the developing baby. And it turns out cartilage is good to have there because, first of all, it makes it nice and flexible. I guess you can't break any bones in the baby in the womb if they're all cartilage. But cartilage doesn't require a blood supply. It's one of the few tissues in our body that are what we call anaerobic. In fact, cartilage can't stand blood. Cartilage actually secretes a chemical called anti-angiogenic factor that chases blood vessels away. Can you think of any other organ in the body that would survive very long if it chased blood vessels away? In the case of cartilage, it works. And that's a good idea that cartilage doesn't require blood vessels, because imagine cartilage on the end of a bone. Take right here at the hip. This hip bone articulates with the head of the femur. And there's a thin layer of cartilage in the little cup there and a thin layer of cartilage on the bone. If a man, let's say, weighed 200 pounds and was out jogging, every time his foot hits the ground, there would be about 600 pounds of force between the end of that femur and that cup that it fits into. If that tissue at the end of the bone required blood vessels, what would happen with a millimeter thick layer of tissue that has blood vessels in with 600 pounds of force squeezing it? Flatten the vessels right out. So by an incredible stroke of dumb luck, we have cartilage that doesn't require blood vessels. No, I don't think it's dumb luck at all. I think it's a marvelous provision of a wonderful creator. So while cartilage is lost and replaced with bone over most of the body, it's very key that we retain cartilage on the ends of the bones, that we retain it, ends of the ribs, and ear and nose. Those cartilages tend not to break down, and that's a good thing. Obviously, there's something different about them. Well, this is the way cartilage looks when it's young and it's fresh and it's growing. Cartilage can grow two different ways. It can grow from the inside. We call that interstitial growth. You grow by interstitial growth. Cells inside your body are dividing, and from the time you're a child, you've become bigger and bigger. That's hyperplasia, more cells, right? Bone can't grow that way. Bone you have to think of as being more like, well, not exactly like cement or plaster, but it's a hard material. The cells inside a bone can't divide and make it get bigger from within. Bone has to grow by what we call a process of accretion. That's the way a snowball grows. When you roll a snowball, the snow does not go inside the snowball. It just keeps coating the outside. So bone must grow by accretion, or apposition is another word we use, appositional growth. Bone can only grow appositionally. It cannot grow interstitially. Cartilage can grow both ways. Interstitially, because it stretches, and at the surface, appositionally. So it's a good grower. Here you can see all the cartilage cells. These are very young. They're probably still chondroblasts. They haven't terminally differentiated yet. They're capable of dividing even inside. Look at this one right here. That's a metaphase plate of cell division, showing that that cell is in the process of dividing. So that would be an example of interstitial growth. We can have appositional growth occurring out here at the surface as well. Well, that little cartilage bone, I believe that's a toe bone you're looking at there. That little bone can grow bigger and bigger. Of course, it might not be proper to call it a bone yet, being made of cartilage. But at some point, blood vessels are going to sneak into this cartilage. Now, I told you cartilage can't stand blood vessels, but somehow they manage to insert themselves. And when they do, that cartilage starts to become hypertrophic. The cells, they get bigger, and the matrix starts having an affinity for calcium. And when that calcium comes in, you get calcified cartilage. And that is not a long-lasting material, as we'll see. So, dividing chondroblast right there. This is a more mature cartilage here. This is hyaline cartilage. One of the places that we have hyaline cartilage, and I believe that's where this section was taken from, are the rings in our trachea. You know, our windpipe, when we inhale, would tend to collapse, right? Because we have less pressure inside than we have outside. That brings the air in. They would collapse if it was like the esophagus, a soft tube. But the cartilage has rings, sort of like you see that keep a vacuum cleaner hose from collapsing. You know? It has cartilage rings, and the rings don't go all the way around in a circle. They just go part way around like a horseshoe. That's good, because the esophagus is right behind the trachea, and you need a kind of a soft wall there for the esophagus. But I'll tell you, the Lord just doesn't overlook any of the details. We call this hyaline cartilage. Hyaline means glassy. And that's the way it looks when you see it, even grossly. It has a glassy look to it. And inside the cartilage, we see the various chondroblasts and chondrocytes. One thing that's distinctive about hyaline cartilage is something called isogenous nests. I'm pointing to an isogenous nest there. What that is, that represents the daughter cells. We call the cells that are products of division, call them the daughter cells. I don't know why we don't call them the son cells. We call them the daughter cells. A nest like that represents all the offspring from a particular starting cell. And so because of this interstitial growth, you'll get these little nests of cells. And that's very distinctive. It allows us to see cartilage. In between here, all this space between the cells, this is cartilage matrix. And normally, it wouldn't have any affinity for blood vessels. In fact, it would chase them away. Normally, it wouldn't have any affinity for calcium salts. Well, we mentioned this important cartilage. This is articular cartilage. This cartilage that you're seeing right here happens to be what we call the MP junction. That's between the metacarpal bone in the palm and the first bone of the finger here. We call it the proximal phalanx. So get it, MP, metacarpal phalangeal junction. That junction allows you to be able to do this. Isn't that great? Be able to do this. And you're looking at that there. And we see the thin layer of cartilage on the two bones where they meet in a joint. This is the joint capsule out here. It's completely sealed. And there is a lubricant, a marvelous lubricant with just the right viscosity in there. You ever do any lube job on your joints at all? Get a grease gun, oil can? Isn't it great? We don't have to do that. Imagine having a grease zerks, you know, like a car, go around lubricating. It's all automatic. And that lubricant is just perfect. It's the right quantity. It gets replaced. I mean, when's the last time you changed lubricant in your joints? Yeah, the Lord takes care of everything. Takes care of everything. What a wonderful system this is. And so being cartilage, it's smooth, it's slippery, and it doesn't have any blood vessels, and you can put load on it and squeeze it. You don't have to worry about squeezing the blood out of it, and it's good. It never turns into bone. Very good. Let's magnify that. Special cartilage called articular cartilage. Articular is what we say when we bend the arm. That's articulating the limb. So it's articular cartilage. Here you're going to see the difference in the microscope between cartilage and bone. What did I say was special about cartilage? It has no blood vessels. Bone is full of blood vessels. So if that's all you know, you can tell cartilage from bone. Take a look at it. Up here, this is cartilage, this lighter gray material from here down to where the red starts. And the red has lots of holes in it. Looks like Swiss cheese. That's typical of bone. It is absolutely permeated with blood vessels down to capillary size. So that's a nice solid attachment there that doesn't come loose. Cartilage and bone. Well, here's the special cartilage that contains elastic fibers. Remember, some connective tissue had elastic fibers. Our dermis has it. It allows skin to kind of go back to its original shape when you stretch it. There is a special type of cartilage called elastic cartilage, and that's what you have in your ear. That's elastic cartilage. That's why you can take your ear and go bang, make it bounce real fast like that. It springs back because there are like little rubber fibers running through the cartilage. And the fibers have been stained purple in this preparation. And the big cells you see in here, they're chondrocytes. They probably can't divide anymore. They're just sort of sitting in there, taking up space. This is another very, very important cartilage. And this is, we talked about how the tendon attached to the muscle. Remember that end was the Chinese finger trap on little processes that came off the end of the muscle, as well as collagen fibers that go around the muscle fiber and around the fascicles of muscle fibers. That's how the tendon attaches to the muscle. Now we're going to look at the other end. How does the tendon attach to the bone? And it attaches to the bone pretty much the way a wick is embedded in a candle. When the candle was still soft, the wick was down there, and when it hardened around that wick and kind of penetrated right into the wick, and you really can't pull a wick out of a candle, can you? Same thing here. The tendons penetrate right into the bone. They did this back when the bone was just developing and soft yet, and the bone mineralized around it. And so you see these fibers penetrating right in across the bone. We call them Sharpie's fibers, named after, I guess, a fellow called Sharpie. In this picture, this is tendon out here. That's regular, dense connective tissue. All the fibers running pretty much the same way. That makes them not very stretchy. Tendons usually have a little bit of a wave to it rather than straight. And this is important because if they were absolutely straight, when you put a load on it suddenly, it could snap the tendon. But by having a little bit of wave in it, there's a little give before it reaches its non-stretch point. So here are these tendon fibers, collagen, all running the same direction, coming in. And right here we are getting into cartilage. So we have a similar situation with cartilage and bone. With bone, these fibers run into bone. In cartilage, they run right on into the cartilage in a similar way. And fibrocartilage, I think the best examples of fibrocartilage in our body would be the intervertebral discs. They're fibrocartilage. You see, fibrocartilage is very strong. Cartilage itself, you know, would be a little more fragile. But when you run collagen fibers into cartilage, it becomes strong. You notice it's like cords in a tire, like in a radial ply tire. You have the cords running through the rubber. And so we have all these tough collagen cords going through, and they penetrate right into the bone from the cartilage. So the intervertebral disc is fibrocartilage. The pubic symphysis here, between the pubic bones, that's fibrocartilage. In fact, we have ligaments holding the bones of the hips together, so there's a little bit of give there. That's important, because if you were up on a step ladder and you jumped off and you hit the ground, if your pelvis was just solid, I mean, you could break a bone, even the leg or in the hip. But the hip is just a little bit of a give, so it takes up some of that impact. When a baby's born, all these ligaments and the fibrocartilage dissolve a little bit, not completely, and that allows the pelvis to open up and the baby to leave. Otherwise, a baby's head would not fit through the birth canal. Wow, you talk about a stroke of incredible luck, huh? If you were an evolutionist, you'd have to believe that happened by chance. I don't believe that. I believe it's a provision the Lord made. This is the way the fibrocartilage looks. There's a liquid center in the intervertebral disc. Has a wonderful name, the nucleus pulposa. Isn't that wonderful? You stand by you the rest of your life when you're short of a fancy word to say, well, of course, there's always the nucleus pulposa. The collagen fibers go from one vertebral body to the next, penetrating right into the bone as Sharpie's fibers, and the cartilage itself then is called fibrocartilage. And if you make a cross-section across here and look at it as we've done on the right, you can see layer after layer of collagen, and the fibers in each layer crisscross like in plywood to give it strength. And then that's that liquid center. And that's important because if you kind of walk along bouncing on your feet like that, every time your feet hit, your intervertebral discs squish a little bit. Otherwise there'd be a solid jar there. If you heard of older people say, I used to be 6 foot 2 inches tall, and now I'm only 6 foot 1 inch. I used to hear that from people and think they were crazy. They were just getting old and mine wasn't working too well. But we do get shorter as we get older. And the reason is these intervertebral discs start collapsing a bit. It can take an inch or so off your height as you get older. Stay young, I recommend it. Well, let's talk about bones. I got a question for you. How many bones in the body? I think you know, don't you, Matthew? How many bones in a human body?
200 or so?
Yeah, they're a little over 200, 207 perhaps. It's kind of hard to be precise because some of the bones fuse, and if they're separate, we might count them as two. If they fuse, we count them as one. But about 207 bones. Actually, when we were in the womb, and even when we were first born, we actually had more bones because some bones have to fuse together. That hip bone, the pelvis, was 3 different bones, for example, and that all fuses together. So we have a lot of bones, and they're all very, very useful. None of them are there just for looks. Every bump, every ridge, every part of that bone has a function. It's not just pretty, it has a function. Well, while we're talking about how many and numbers, what's the biggest bone in the body?
Femur?
You got it, the femur. We happen to have a femur here. While Yorick there is plastic, this is a real human femur, and you can see a lot of detail in here, and we'll be looking at that a bit later. Right now, we're just looking at the size. This is actually about my size. And remember, in life, it would have had a little cartilage coat right here, and a cartilage coat down here. That would be the articular cartilage. Here's another question. If that is the largest bone in the body, what are the smallest bones in the body? They're in the ear. Have you heard of the ear bones? We'll talk about this in another lecture. In fact, probably in the last in the series or so. But for now, I brought along the bones of the ear. They're so tiny that if I brought them loose like this, we'd lose them. So they have been embedded in plastic. This is called a bioplastic bone. And these 3 little bones are absolutely essential for your hearing, as we'll see. For now, just admire their size and the beauty that God has put even into such a tiny bone. You know, there are several things distinctive about those little bones. They are the littlest bones in the body, by size and by weight. And they are the only bones in the body that never grow. They were that size when you were born. They're that size today. They'll be that size the last day on earth. So that's another distinctive thing. So they're the smallest bones in the body. They're the only bones that never grow. The third thing is they are the only bones in the body that are solid. All other bones are hollow. I say hollow. There's something in the space. And for example, this femur has been sawed down the center. And if we open it up, you can see that it's hollow. Matthew, you may look at that one. And you may look at that one. That hollow space, of course, in life didn't have air in it. It had what? What do we call that material in the bone? Got that? Marrow. Have you heard of marrow? There's 2 kinds of marrow. There's red marrow and there's yellow marrow. Now, red marrow, it has a lot of red blood cell producing cells in it. And most bones have at least a little bit of red marrow. But as we get older, the red marrow is replaced with yellow marrow, which is just fat cells. We'll talk about that more a little later. Some of the bones in our body are hollow, but do not contain marrow. They're like in a bird. You know, some of the bones of a bird have an air space inside that communicates with the respiratory system and keeps the weight down. We have hollow bones. They're in our sinuses, like in our skull. There are bones there that are hollow and ultimately open to the respiratory space. Well, we're talking about bones. What do bones do for us? Their functions. They do a lot of things. Some of them are pretty obvious. They fall into the category of duh. For example, mechanical support. They hold us up. They're God's girders. That's pretty obvious. They protect the organs of the body. Think of this. Let's look at Yorick here a bit and look at how bones protect. First of all, the skull, the brain is really protected here, and there are several bones that make up the skull that have all fused together. And so the brain is beautifully protected in there. The spinal cord running down through the vertebra here is protected. Algernon, if you don't mind, I'm going to steal a vertebra. Algernon does not mind.
The human body is truly a miracle. Evidence of God's handiwork abounds. In the 8-DVD set, Body of Evidence, you'll learn fascinating details about the human body from Dr. David Menton. Dr. Menton combines his years of experience as a medical school instructor with his love for God and commitment to the biblical account of creation.
Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. The Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life.
Body of evidence includes 9 major areas of the human body, including the skeletal system, the heart, and the digestive system.
To see the next part, we're really going to have to temporarily remove the large, we call that the transverse colon. Now you're looking inside, and you see how these valves are acting?
Order today and witness the amazing design of the human body and be astounded at a great marvel of God's creation. Thank you.